Welcome, everybody. Shiur number 619. Okay, we're learning today Le'iloi Nishmas Moshe Dov ben Rabban Zizu Lidl Nishmas Blima Bas Rab Moshe, and also in the Schus Yitzchak Yosef ben Marie Molka should be Magzul Shuva B'Soich Sha'ar Yisrael. Okay, getting back to a malacha of TOFAIR sewing. So in the last couple of shiurim, in TOFAIR and in kosher, in tying, untying, and in sewing and tearing and so on, we went through the ins and outs as to the differentiation between the malacha of tying kosher and TOFAIR sewing. And we also went through as to where it was in the Mishnah in reference to sewing the curtains, making two pieces into one, and so on. So now we want to get down to the nitty gritty, as they say, and we want to know what exactly is the Isser of TOFAIR. Now we're going to break it up. There's a few different categories in TOFAIR and sewing. When we talk about TOFAIR, number one, we're going to talk about, first of all, the needle and the thread aspect of it. We'll see that sometimes it is negei l'maisa, not only whereby one actually takes a needle and thread and starts, sewing up a seam on Shabbos, but we'll see sometimes there's issues of whereby somebody could actually pull a thread. They might have a loose button, pull a thread, tightening up the button. They might put, somebody's hem might have fallen down. They pull a little bit of the thread and they tighten it up. That's running into a problem, a hem, a seam, or so on. Then that's the first category. Then we're going to talk about, Bezras Hashem, we have to talk about safety pins, regular straight pins, regular safety pins. Somebody's hem fell down, a cuff fell down. Could they use a safety pin to put in to hold it back up? Sticking it in once, twice, is that a problem? And we have to, of course, talk about all the various different types of gluing, stickers, glue itself per se, magnets, reclosing a bag or a box whereby there might be a little bit of gluey top on it, or so on. So as we could see that the malacha, as we've spoken about in the past, the malacha of TOFAIR sewing is not just sewing per se, but it involves many various different shilas, of course, which come up on a weekly Shabbos. So let's start with our first category, and that is the needle and the thread, so to say. And we're going to go to the Sefer Oitzer Halachos. He brings it down very nice, the introduction as to what it's all about. First of all, he does bring down on the bottom from the Gemara, from the Mishnah, actually, where we spoke about, and also in the Sefer Lamites Malachas, we said there was something called a darna. It was like a little bug or so, and they used to take a bite sometimes out of material, out of the curtains, and they had to sew up that hole. And that was one way of the sewing. And then we mentioned also that the five ureas, the five curtains, and so on, had to be connected together. Okay, so he says like this in the introduction: Isser litfar b'Shabbos. One is not allowed to sew on Shabbos. That we understand. Regular sewing on Shabbos can't be done. What exactly is sewing? Do I have to sew up a full hem? Do I have to make a full pair of pants? Do I have to make a full skirt? What exactly? When am I chayiv for sewing per se? If I would have a needle and a thread. So he continues on. He says, "V'toifer shtei tfiris." One who sews 2 stitches. So before we go further, I want to explain one thing, which is an important thing to keep in mind in quite a number of the malachas, especially the ones that don't pertain so much to food. In Yonim of TOFAIR, kosher, we're going to see also in Boina, building, and so on. We saw it in Kaisev, writing, and there's an Indian called kayama. Miskayemes, there's various different ways of saying, but Lamaisa, it's a Inyan of being established. In other words, the malacha, the act that's being done, is it something that is going to last? Now, what exactly means last? How long are we talking about? Obviously, we have to see, but is it something that's going to last? In other words, for example, if I just take a needle and a thread, and I just take a thread for that matter, whatever the case is, or with the needle, without the needle, and I just put it through once. For example, if I take a piece of material and I stick it in once. So the question is now, 1 second, you'll say 1 second, but the person is now sewing. I'm taking a needle and a thread and I just stick the thread into the material. Is that thread going to last at all? Is that going to stay? Does that have any sort of a kiyum of an established act whereby it'll actually stay for a longer period of time. And when we say longer period of time, how long, we have to see each item as we go down the line. But in general, something like that is not gonna, as we know, anybody's into sewing, we realize that won't last. I take a regular thread that does not have any knots on the ends, which we'll see in a minute what that's all about. A regular straight thread, and I just stick it in once into a material. So I didn't do anything. Why didn't I do anything? You'll say, what do you mean? I took a thread and I took a thread with a needle and I stuck it into a cloth. Isn't that sewing? So the answer is no, because of the fact that there's no real kayam over there. There is no everlasting effect on the action which I did. So explains to us the Sefer Eitzer Halachos b'Shem the Rambam, and he brings it down afterwards from the Achronim, Magen Avram, Shulchan Aruch, so on, Mishnah Berurah, and so on. That shtei tfiros, one, you need at least 2 stitches. There has to be at least 2 stitches. And not just 2 stitches, in other words, whereby one would have to be, there would be a problem of TOFAIR. You would need the 2 stitches, and not just the 2 stitches, but you would also need a knot at the end of the thread. Why do we need a knot at the end of the thread? As we know, the knot is what holds the thread from coming out. When you have a knot, it prevents the thread from coming out of the garment. So now we're going to say, he brings down b'Shem the Mishnah Berurah again and others that's going on by two stitches. One makes 2 stitches, and they have knots on both ends of the thread. So good. So that's going to be a kayamadik, an established type of a stitch, and one is going to be chayiv for TOFAIR. Okay, now just to read the Lashon in the Mishnah Berurah, as we always try and do, in Sif Katan Chof Zayin. Of course, our Siman is Siman Shin Mem, Sif Katan Chof Zayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah, explaining TOFAIR, our malacha of sewing. HaTOFAIR shtei tfiros is chayiv. One who sews 2 stitches is chayiv. When is he chayiv? When is the person chayiv? Hu shekasher rashei hachut. If they made a rashei hachut, they made a knot mikan kadei sheloi tishmait. They made a knot on each end of the thread, and they sewed 2 stitches in order that it should not come out. That's again because the knot is what holds these stitches in the garment. Vafilu loy hoya shel kayama. So the Mishnah Berurah is talking about the knots, actually, that the knots weren't kayama. Okay, be it as it may, but you have now 2 knots on the ends of the stitches, and you have 2 stitches that were on the ends of the thread. You have 2 stitches that were made. Tells us the Mishnah Berurah the person would be chayiv in such a state. So now the Mishnah Berurah says further, and then he talks about making the knot. It's a kayama. Person would be chayiv for kosher. We're not going to get into that right now because we're doing kosher tying on our alternate days, so we want to talk about it over there. But he says further, does the Mishnah Berurah v'chol zeh. Again, we're trying right now to work on the category where, in reference to the thread and putting a thread into material, when would somebody be chayiv? When would it be asa midrabanan? And then we're going to see the practical applications, how Wataka would apply in a weekly Shabbos, where one might not even be aware they could be over the iser of TOFAIR. So it says the Mishnah Berurah further, this, when we say 2 stitches in a garment, one sews 2 stitches in a garment, and there's 2 knots at the ends of the thread, they're chayiv cholza linyan chiyuva. Right. So that's as far as being chayiv. Aval inyan isura, as far as midrabanan, yesh amrim da aser, it would still be aser with 2 stitches. Vafilu loy aser kesher klal, even if one did not make any knots at all. In other words, one made simply 2 stitches, even without the knots at the ends of the thread, that would still be aser midrabanan. In order to be chayiv, we're saying one has to have the knots at the ends of the threads. Not having the knots at the end of the threads, 2 stitches would be aser midrabanan. Okay, so now finishes off the Mishnah Berurah. He talks about over there in the middle of the safety pins, which we're going to get into as a separate inyan, because I don't want it to get too confusing. We want to take it one step at a time. First, we want to see what the problem is with TOFAIR, when one is chayiv, when it's asa midrabanan, and then from there we could start to talk about Bezras Hashem, the inyan of the safety pins. So he finishes off as a Mishnah Berurah over there in Sif Katan Chav Zayin. Ve'im also shloisha tefiros, if one makes 3 stitches, is chayiv, one would still be chayiv afbali kesher, even without a knot at the ends of the threads. Sharei miskayemes atfira, because of the fact, like we said, the stitches will be everlasting. They're going to last. How long they'll last? They're going to last, whatever the case is. Again, we'll try and get into that a little bit, but they're going to last for a longer period of time. He brings that down b'shem the Rambam. So let's just chazer over what we got today real quickly. We have a few different categories in the sewing, when one is chayiv, when it's asmid rabbanon, when it's mutter. So we said in general, one just sticking it in one's l'chayra, there's not an issue with that, sticking in the thread once. We'll try and get a little bit more into that, see if there possibly might be an isra of kareya, tearing, but we'll leave that for now. As far as the stitches go, making 2 stitches in a garment, putting 2 stitches, if you have on the ends of the threads kasharim knots, then that would be, a person would be chayiv. If one makes 2 stitches and at the ends of the thread there are no knots, that would be aser midrabanan. Making 3 stitches, tells us the Mishnah Berurah, 3 stitches even without knots at the end of the thread would be also chayiv, again because of the fact that it is a kayama, it's an established thing like we said. Okay, we're going to stop here and continue next time. Thank you for listening. Atzloch and bracha, kol tov.